Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the briny, boot-soaking world of 17th century Dutch shipbuilding. Picture this. The first pale fingers of morning light stretch over the horizon, casting a soft glow on the damp, seaweed-scented banks of the Zaanstreek. You're ankle-deep in mud, your breath puffing little clouds into the chilly North Sea air. And your first job of the day involves trying not to drop a timber beam that weighs more than your entire extended family. Welcome to your new life as a shipwright's apprentice. This is no gleaming shipyard, just a soggy, sprawling chaos of half-finished hulls, screeching gulls, and the occasional wheelbarrow filled with eel pies. Somewhere nearby, someone's already shouting about missing nails. The noise of hammers, saws, and very colorful Dutch swearing rattles through the air. You don't know much about shipbuilding yet, but one thing is immediately clear. You probably won't survive this job without losing at least one toe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe it only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it over there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past thick-cut timbers stacked like massive Lincoln logs and workers so covered in sawdust they look like ancient ghosts. A loud creak draws your attention to today's main event, laying the keel of a new Fluyt. That's the backbone of the ship along, solid timber running straight down the center like a spine. It defines the entire shape of the hull. Mess it up, and congratulations, you've just built a very expensive bathtub. This isn't your typical warship. The Fluyt is the unsung hero of Dutch economic dominance, a merchant vessel designed purely for hauling as much cargo as humanly possible with as little tax as legally permissible. It's tall and skinny up top, fat and flat below, like a seafaring pair in wooden corsets. Historians still argue whether this unique shape was designed solely to sneak under Danish customs taxes, which charged more for wide-decked ships passing through the Resund. The Fluyt's narrow upper deck means you're not wasting space on extra cannons or officers' lounges. Now this baby is all about bulk goods, salted herring, Baltic grain, Swedish copper. Oh, and sheep. Lots of very seasick sheep. You help haul the keel timber into position using a mix of brute force, ropes, pulleys, and at least one very confused donkey. The timber is oak, of course, durable, strong, and just heavy enough to make you regret every decision that led you to this job. You smear the ends with a thick, dark paste of pitch to keep rot at bay. Somewhere nearby, a more experienced builder eyes your smearing technique and mutters something in Dutch that probably translates to absolute amateur. Here's a mainstream historical fact to chew on while your arms scream from lifting. By the mid-1600s, the Dutch were building Fluyts faster than anyone else could build anything. Some shipyards could churn out several a year, a pace so rapid that other nations grumbled about unfair competition. Spoiler, they were just jealous. As the keel is finally settled into place on its temporary support blocks called stocks, you get your first real look at what will become a floating, creaking juggernaut of commerce. For now, though, it just looks like a long wooden beam sitting awkwardly in the mud. But it's not just any beam. It's been selected, felled, seasoned, shaped, and blessed by people who care very deeply about grain alignment and wood knots. One odd tidbit you overhear while wiping pitch off your boots: some shipbuilders swear by moon-cut timber that trees felled only during the waning moon. Supposedly the lower sap content makes the wood less likely to rot. Others say that's pure superstition, but hey, when your ship's survival depends on not disintegrating mid-Baltic, you'll try anything. As the sun rises higher, a gentle fog begins to lift, revealing more of the shipyard. You spot the soppit, basically a giant trench over which two poor souls are currently sawing a log lengthwise. One stands above the pit, the other inside it. Guess which one gets covered in sawdust and resin for the rest of the day. There's no brake bell. Here's just the rhythm of the work. You wipe your brow with a rough linen sleeve, which now smells deeply of tar, old wood, and something suspiciously fishy. Someone hands you a chunk of rye bread, which you attempt to chew through while admiring the chaos of construction around you. A nearby crew is arguing loudly about whether the fore or aft should be notched first for the rising frames. Apparently, there is an old guild tradition that demands a toast be made after the first rib is attached. One guy insists this happened before the keel was even dry last time. Historians still argue whether this toast custom was symbolic, functional, or just an excuse to drink before noon. You get your first taste of guild politics too literally. One of the carpenters slips you a piece of hard cheese and warns you not to be seen using a chisel with a foreign handle. Apparently, tools were as patriotic as ships back then. Before the day ends, a master shipwright walks the length of the keel, running his hands over the wood, eyes narrowed. He mutters something approving and scratches a mark at the forward end. That'll be your cue tomorrow? Ribbing the skeleton begins, and you'll get even more familiar with things like steam bending, tree nails, and how to politely scream when something pinches your finger in a clamp. But for now, you head home through the muck, feet aching, tunic stained, and the distant silhouette of the emerging Fluyt etched in your memory. You wake to the sound of gulls shrieking like they're auditioning for a sea monster movie. And already your hands ache from yesterday's dance with pitch, splinters, and gravity. But there's no sympathy waiting at the shipyard, only more lumber, more shouting, in the comforting aroma of wet rope and morning eel stew. You trudge in, only half awake, and spot the massive oak keel from yesterday now framed by little marker posts. It's time to start adding ribs to the ship's skeleton. Ribbing a ship isn't like putting together IKEA furniture. Though one could argue the directions are just as vague and the consequences for misalignment much, much wetter. These ribs, or frames, will give the Fluyt her shape, her volume, and her uniquely bulbous bottom the key to her success as a cargo queen of the sea. You begin by hauling pre-cut futtocks, which are curved pieces of timber destined to form the ribs. They don't start off curved, of course. Each one has been steamed, tortured, and bent, using a method equal parts craftsmanship and low-key lumber abuse. The steaming sheds, basically giant wooden bathtubs full of boiling water and bark super puffing smoke like angry dragons today. You take your place near one, where the head carpenter signals it's time to pull a timber out. It's hot, it's slippery, it's awkward, and it has exactly 5 seconds of bendable grace before it decides it's going back to being a tree. You and 2 others wrestle it onto a jig, slowly forcing it into that telltale Fluyt frame curve. Once it cools and stiffens, you'll fasten it onto the keel using wooden dowels called tree nails. Yes, nails made of tree. You try not to think about the irony. This part of the build is surprisingly noisy, not just from tools, but from disagreements. Everyone has an opinion on where the first master frame should go. It's a critical piece kind, of like the first domino that determines the whole line. Historians still argue whether Dutch builders used pre-drawn templates for their frames, or just relied on eyeballing it with experience. Either way, today, you're redoing a lot of nodding and pretending you understand what fairing the hull line means. Once the master frame is set and you wedge it upright, something magical happens. You can suddenly see the ship. It's like the ghost of a Fluyt has been anchored to the ground, and with each rib you add, her outline becomes clear and narrow at the top, bloated near the waterline. Exactly the opposite of how most warships were built. Here's your mainstream historical fact. This shape wasn't just for sneaky tax reasons. It was also about efficiency. The Fluyt's fat lower hull could carry enormous cargo with a relatively small crew. This meant fewer wages, more goods, and happier merchants. The Dutch, in short, had figured out that boring beats flashy when it comes to profits. You hammer in tree nails with a wooden mallet that someone keeps calling OL Whacker. And each strike sends a satisfying thunk through the timber. You can't help but wonder how these pegs, basically glorified wooden chopsticks, can hold an entire ship together. But they swell with moisture and lock tighter than iron, especially if soaked in pine tar, which smells like hot sap and mild headaches. Between ribs, the shipyard continues to buzz. 2 dogs chase each other through the mud. Someone's yelling about a missing adze, and near the steaming vat, one of the apprentices tells you an odd story about how some shipwrights believe certain wood knots are lucky, especially spiral ones shaped like eyes. They call them sailors' wards, and supposedly they keep storms away. You find one later in a futtock and quietly decide to leave it untrimmed. Laying ribs is a repetitive job, but not mindless. Each frame has to be symmetrical, perfectly aligned, and spaced just so. Too close, and you waste wood and weight. Too far, and the whole flexes like a slinky in a hurricane. Everyone's squinting down lengths of timber, muttering about camber and flare, and adjusting things half an inch at a time. You squint too, but mostly because someone's been throwing sawdust again. You pause for lunch-hard cheese, rye bread, and something that might once have been an onion and. Listen as a veteran builder regales the crew with tales of the Fluyt that sank sideways. Apparently its frames were misaligned, so it leaned weirdly and capsized in calm waters near Danzig. You don't know if he's exaggerating, but you vow to double-check the angles next time. By mid-afternoon, the skeleton is rising. Frame after frame, the Fluyt begins to look less like a collection of curved fence posts and more like a real ship. Each rib is a fingerprint of the builder's intents. Some thicker, some subtly twisted, all working together to define the Fluyt's cargo-hungry belly. You run your hand over the curves and realize it's not all just cold math and angles. It's artistry, too. One debate breaks out over a slight dip in one of the midship frames. It's maybe a quarter-inch off, barely noticeable. But the master builder stares at it like it insulted his grandmother. Heated words fly. You hear phrases like hydrodynamic drag and gild embarrassment. Eventually, the frame is pulled, re-steamed, and reset. The difference is almost imperceptible, but everyone breathes easier. As dusk creeps in and the sky turns to dusty pink, the silhouette of the half-skeleton Fluyt casts long shadows across the yard. The gulls quiet down. You drag your aching body back toward home, clothed stiff with pitch and sweat. But you glance back over your shoulder one last time. She's still just a frame, a suggestion of a ship. But now she has ribs. She's starting to look like she might one day float. You're starting to believe it too. You arrive the next morning before the sun does, greeted once again by the now familiar sense of pitch oak and faintly roasted eel, the breakfast of champions, or at least shipwrights. Yesterday's framework stands in the dawn light like a skeletal whale, all sweeping curves and sticky tree nails. Today, you're planking the hull, and that means one thing: hammers, hundreds of them. In a symphony of groans from your lower back, planking is no small task. You're about to close in the ship's belly with dozens of long, thick boards each, one-shaped, fitted, and nailed with care. It's like dressing a stubborn, creaking wooden beast in a suit of armor. Only each piece has to match the next exactly, or you'll be the proud parent of a leaky disaster. The boards, usually pine or fir, depending on cost and what's lying around, are hauled over from the drying racks. Each one is heavy enough to require 3 people to carry and stubborn enough to make you question your life choices. You're assigned to a team fitting the bottommost planks first, just above the keel. These are called the garboard strakes, and if you mess these up, the whole ship will twist like a poorly baked pretzel. You crouch awkwardly, driving a chisel into the edge of a plank, shaping it into what's called a bevel. Each edge needs to taper just right, so that, once the plank is pressed against the curved rib, it sits flush like it was born there. Easier said than done. A small army of workers stands over steaming vats and sawhorses, checking angles like they're measuring diamonds. The boards are laid using the clinker method, meaning they overlap slightly, sort of like shingles on a roof. This style gives the ship strength and a bit of flex when the waves decide to get punchy. Historians still argue whether some Dutch shipyards preferred carvel planking ware. The boards sit edge to edge for speed and aesthetics. But here, in this shipyard, the Fluyt is a clinker-built beauty. You and the crew wedge the planks in place with long iron clamps, called dogs, which bite down with terrifying strength and hold things while you hammer like your life depends on it. And, to a degree, it does. A warped or misaligned plank means hours of rework, or worse, future leaks that only reveal themselves when you remid Baltic. And surrounded by fish who look like they rejudging your craftsmanship. One of the veterans hums a tune while stuffing wads of oakum pulpy fibers soaked in tar between 2 planks. This stuff fills the gaps and ensures the planks hug each other like old friends. You ask where the oakum comes from, and he grins. Old rope. Chewed by time, boiled in tar, and pressed into cracks. Just like my heart, you decide not to dig deeper into that metaphor. By midday, a sizable portion of the hull is covered in planks. The curves of the Fluyt's design become more pronounced, now narrow above the waterline, absurdly wide below. You can see exactly why it carried more cargo per square inch than any ship of its time. It's basically the Costco of the high seas. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Flights revolutionized international shipping because they were simple, cheap, and efficient. While other nations built ships with cannons and flair, the Dutch doubled down on boring, boxy brilliance. It is estimated that Dutch merchants controlled up to half the world's shipping trade during the Golden Age thanks, largely to the humble Fluyt. As the work continues, you pick up a strange bit of trivia from an older shipwright. He swears some builders once filled plank gaps with cheese rinds when oakum was scarce. It sounds ridiculous until you remember the Dutch really do take cheese that seriously. Nobody here's admitting to it openly, but you notice a suspiciously gouda-smelling scrap near the caulking bucket. You're handed a broad axe next, tasked with shaving the outer surface of a particularly stubborn plank. The motion is awkward at first, like trying to butter a rolling pin with a hatchet. But you find the rhythm eventually. Scrape, tap, adjust, scrape. And just like that, you're shaping part of a ship destined to cross oceans, haul cargo, and be complained about by future deckhands. Of course, no two planks are identical, which has a bit of warp, and not a mood of its own. There's a superstition floating around that if you whisper to the plank before you nail it in, it'll lie flatter. One of your crewmates catches you mumbling at a board and gives you a nod of approval. Talk to M. They listen. The whole takes form and layers a plank like a page in a wooden book, wrapping tighter around the Fluyt's wide belly. As the upper planks go in, you have to work at a steeper angle, standing on scaffolds that creak with judgment every time you shift your weight. Your arms are jelly by this point, but you're too far in to quit. One of the senior carpenters calls for a plank check, an old ritual where everyone walks the length of the hull, inspecting for any irregularities, warping, or suspiciously cheerful knots. A small disagreement erupts over a ripple in the aft quarter. Is it just surface warp, or a sign of deeper frame tension? The builders murmur and poke at it with rules and levels. In the end, they leave it. It'll swell straight once she hits the sea. Someone mutters with the confidence of someone who said that 3 times before and only had one ship sink. As the sun lowers and the shadows lengthen, the shipyard falls into a strange quiet. Tools are downed, buckets are covered, and someone starts roasting something that might be fish or might be mystery meat on a spit nearby. You sit back against a plank you helped install, tracing the grain with your sore fingertips. The ship creaks softly as it settles into place, almost like she's exhaling. You've spent the day sealing her sides, wrapping her in a skin of wood and tar and prayer. She's still just a husk, a promise of movement and trade and creaking journeys. But now, with her belly wrapped tight, she finally feels like something that might float. You blink against the bright morning sun, which today feels just a bit too eager to highlight every aching muscle from yesterday's plank fest. But no rest for the well-splintered. You've wrapped the Fluyt's belly, and now it's time to craft her inner bones. The decks and bulkheads await, and yes, you'll be walking across timber that still groans like it's unsure about supporting your weight. The lower deck goes in first. You step into the curved belly of the ship, where the ribs surround you like you're inside a giant wooden rib cage. Light filters through tiny gaps in the planking above, creating faint stripes on the dusty ground. Your job today is to help install the beams that will hold the deck planks giant. Horizontal timbers resting across the width of the ship, like the wooden skeleton of a ceiling. These beams will bear the weight of cargo, crew, and the occasional goat, possibly multiple goats. The beams are massive, and they're mounted into notches carved into the tops of the ribs. These are called beam shelves. And to fix them in place, you use yet more tree nails, wedges, and about 16 different swear substitutes because every beam seems to have its own opinion on how it wants to sit. Some slip right in, others squeal, buckle, and bounce out like they're auditioning for a slapstick comedy. Here is your mainstream historical fact. The Fluyt's structure prioritized efficiency and cargo space over all else. Unlike warships with multiple tightly packed gun decks, the Fluyt usually had just one primary cargo deck and a small upper deck for crew and command. It wasn't about looking fierce. It was about making money. Once the beams are in, you start laying deck planks. These are long, flat timbers you shave and shape until they fit snugly side by side. You hammer, wedge, and whisper at them until they lie flat, and then you seal the seams with oakum and pitch. A few feet away, one of the younger apprentices uses too much pitch and now looks like a gingerbread man dipped in molasses. You'll tease him for weeks. The deck slowly comes together beneath your feet. The feel of it is different from the hull. Less about curves, more about flat, sturdy surfaces that will one day carry sacks of grain, crates of porcelain, and barrels of fish that may or may not be leaking by the time they reach Stockholm. Below this main deck, you also help install bulkheads. These are internal walls that section off parts of the ship. They give the hull extra strength and help organize cargo. Most are plain wood, but in the stern, the crew quarters begin to take shape. A tiny room, barely taller than you are, is where the helmsman will eventually sleep, dream, and curse the cold drafts whistling through the seams. You take a break to chew on something resembling dried pear and listen to a grizzled shipwright explain the art of the secret compartment. He claims some captains ask for false walls or hidden holds to smuggle high-tax goods like spices, dyes, or according to him illicit French cheeses. Historians still argue whether these secret compartments were standard features or rare pirate add-ons. You find a suspicious hollow under the stern and give it a knock. Nothing echoes. Yet it's early afternoon now, and your next job is stair work. You didn't expect to build stairs today, but the steep ladder between decks doesn't exactly conjure images of grace and dignity. And since you'd like to avoid falling face first into barrels of salted herring later, you help chisel out steps. Each one is cut into the vertical support timbers, known as stringers, and you wedge in narrow planks until you have something that sort of resembles a staircase. Another debate breaks out near the captain's cabin. One of the joiners insists on adding decorative trim, for morale, he says. Another laughs and asks if cargo barrels care about morale. They bicker over the merits of elegance in a workhorse ship. Eventually a compromise is struck, one single carving of a tulip hidden in the corner of the captain's bunk. Tulips were trendy in 17th century Holland until the whole tulip mania financial crash. That's another sleepy story. You spend part of the afternoon installing supporting knees. These are triangular blocks of timber that reinforce where beams meet ribs. They don't look exciting, but they're the reason the deck won't collapse under weight. One of your crewmates starts naming them. It's Old Reliable, that one's Splinty, and that one Sir Creaks-a-Lot. You try to act above it, but by the fifth one, you're naming them too. By now, the ship's interior is beginning to feel like something real. You can walk the length of the deck without hopping over gaps. You duck into the crew quarters and smell fresh pine and pitch. It's still rough, unpainted, and unfinished, but you can already imagine it filled with snores, wet boots, and questionable stew. One of the quirky tasks today is building the chain locker, a small compartment where the ship's anchor rope and chains will be coiled. It's wedged near the bow, and you have to crawl in on hands and knees to help install the floor slats. It's dark, cramped, and smells faintly like last week's smoked herring. You hit your head twice and invent a new word that sounds polite but feels cathartic. As evening falls, the Fluyt's interior stands framed and floored, a wooden puzzle now mostly solved. There's still a long way to go, rigging masts, sails, finishing touches, but you stand on the deck and feel the solid, satisfying thud of it beneath your boots. A ship is more than a hull. It's what happens inside that space where sailors sleep, where cargo shifts, where barrels roll, and where secrets hide behind bulkheads. You helped shape that world today. From the sweeping deck beams to the cramped little closet where the first mate will one day grumble about rats, you pat one of the supporting knees for good luck, give Splinty an affectionate tap, and make your way down the creaky new stairs, your boots echoing in the belly of something that no longer feels like a project. It's a ship. Not quite alive yet, but very nearly ready to dream. You arrive just as the morning fog begins to lift, curling around the half-finished Fluyt like a sea mist come early to check on her progress. Today you're heading upward. The hull's sealed, the decks are sturdy, and now it's time to raise what will soon make her unmistakably a ship. The towering masts. These are the trees that will catch the wind and pull this lumbering box across oceans, all with a little canvas, a lot of rope, and a whole lot of hope. The Fluyt has 3 masts, main, fore, and mizzen each, a different height, each tasked with carrying its own rigging and sails. But first things first, getting those masts on board. And surprise, they're not single giant trees, but composite constructions made from several straight pine trunks, scarfed and doweled together into taller, stronger timbers. Some say it was to make repairs easier. Others muttered darkly about Dutch budget habits. Historians still argue whether it was a cost-saving measure or a clever weight distribution strategy. You watch as the first section of the main mast is hauled upright by a sheer legs crane, a giant wooden tripod operated by winches, pulleys, and more muscle than you thought legally allowable. You grab a rope and join in the effort. It's slow, it's heavy. It makes your arms feel like stretched marzipan. But up it goes, swinging delicately in the air like a reluctant acrobat, until finally, with a groaning thunk that shakes the whole shipyard, the mast heel nestles into its stepa, a reinforced socket set into the keel itself. It's hard not to feel a little thrill. The ship now points at the sky. Once upright, you have to climb it, not for fun, not for glory, but to help secure the mast with heavy wooden wedges and iron bands. You clutch a series of rungs nailed to the side like some very questionable ladder, up, until the breeze slaps your face and you can see the rooftops of the town in the distance. Chimney smoke curling up like lazy ghosts. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Dutch Flyts typically featured taller masts than earlier designs, allowing them to carry larger sails and make better use of favorable winds, which made their long-haul routes from the Baltic to the Indies remarkably efficient. From this height, you can also see the peculiar shape of the Fluyt more clearly. The deck narrow, the hull wide, and the stern oddly rounded. It was designed to avoid the higher taxes charged on wider upper decks in foreign ports. You shake your head. Never underestimate the lengths to which the Dutch will go to save on port fees. Once the main mast is secured, the crew begins working on the foremast, and then the shorter mast at the rear. Each follows the same tedious, back-breaking ritual. Rig, lift, balance, drop, wedge, check, double-check, and then triple-check. Because a falling mast is the kind of mistake that doesn't offer second chances. By midday, the Fluyt's silhouette has changed dramatically. She no longer looks like a floating barn. She looks ready. Not ready to sail no sails yet, but ready to think about it. Next comes the bowsprit, a long spar that juts out from the front of the ship like an accusing finger. It helps support the forward sails and gives the rigging somewhere to spread out. You and two others balance it awkwardly as it's guided into position, bolted down, and lashed to the prow. It's not just decorative, though. It does look rather dramatic. And yes, it's also great for posing like a sea captain in the breeze, which you definitely don't do. Except maybe just once, when no one's looking. Now comes the tricky part. Installing the mast hardware, cross trees, caps, and topmasts. This process involves straddling narrow beams several stories above the deck while holding hammers. Lines and the deep existential awareness that gravity still works. You inch out along a narrow beam, pass up a mallet, and watch as the topmast is joined to the lower section with tight rope bindings called mast hoops. And then comes rope. So much rope. The riggers arrive like a swarm of caffeinated spiders, each one carrying coils of lines, blocks, pulleys, and tools. They were temporarily reassigned to help them lay out the running rigging. This involves sorting through what appears to be 1,000 indistinguishable ropes, each with a name: halyards for raising sails, sheets for trimming them, braces for adjusting angles, and stays for support. One older rigger grabs your hand, presses a tarred line into your palm, and says, "That's a throat halyard. You'll forget it, the sail won't go up. You'll forget it twice, you'll swim home." Comforting. You spend the afternoon feeding lines through dead eyes. It's tightening ratlins and securing blocks to their places. The ship slowly becomes a spiderweb of purpose and geometry. There's a rhythm to it all. The creak of hemp under tension, the thunk of a wooden block locking into place, the gentle laughter when someone ties themselves to the mizzen mast by accident. For an hour, here is your quirky tidbit of the day. One rigger insists on chewing cloves while he works. Keeps your mouth busy. Keeps the smell of pitch away. You try one. It numbs your tongue for half an hour and you accidentally tie a bowline upside down. Twice. By the end of the day. The masts rise clean and proud into the sky, crowned with spars, fringed with rigging, and anchored by enough rope to lasso a small moon. The ship's shape has transformed yet again from grounded barn, two-frame skeleton, to something you could almost mistake for a seabird caught mid-stretch. Climb down from the rigging as the sun lowers behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the shipyard. The masts catch the last golden light, glowing faintly as if the Fluyt is preparing herself for motion. You run a hand over the tarred rigging, tough, taut, and faintly sticky-oned. Feel a quiet thrill. She's not quite ready to sail, but now she looks like she could. And somehow, despite the bruises, the sweat, and the aching knot forming in your shoulder, you can't help but smile at her. You wake to the groan of rope over pulleys and the deep, steady thud of wooden blocks meeting wood like a heartbeat echoing through the morning mist. The Fluyt stands tall now, her masts and rigging giving her a noble, slightly smug silhouette, like a goose that just won a staring contest. But today's work isn't about grandeur or the sky. Today's all about the sails. You shuffle down the shipyard path, rubbing the grit from your eyes, and find yourself standing in the sail loft, a huge, airy building near the docks, with wide floors and enormous windows that flood the space with light. Here, canvas is cut, stitched, shaped, and cursed into sails. The floorboards are scored with chalk lines. Large swaths of cream-colored cloth stretch from corner to corner like laundry for giants. Sailmaking is part math, part muscle, and part mood. The sailmaker a wiry woman with forearms like braided rope hands. You a curved needle the size of a dessert fork and tells you not to bleed on anything. That's rule 1. The canvas itself is made from flax, woven into dense linen. Dutch flax, naturally the same stuff used for shirts, sacks, and once, somewhat tragically, parachute prototypes. It's stiff at first, like working with potato bark, but as you bend and stitch it, it starts to soften into something pliable. Every seam is doubled, every edge hemmed, and every grommet reinforced with a stitched ring of rope known as a cringle. Here is your mainstream historical fact. Fluyts typically carried square sails on their fore and main masts, with a latine sail on the mizzen mast. This combination gave them flexibility for long-haul trade routes, catching favorable winds across the Baltic, the North Sea, and even as far as the East Indies. You help piece together one of the 4 cells a wide, rectangular sheet that will hang from a horizontal yardarm. It's like building a curtain, if curtains could flatten a man in a light breeze. With the edges stitched and reinforced, you and 2 others begin attaching. Reefing points short loops of rope sewn at intervals so the sail can be shortened in bad weather. It's tedious work, but not boring. Every stitch feels like tying down a potential storm, as you're threading a grommet. A gray-bearded assistant recounts a strange story. A Dutch vessel once arrived in port with patchwork sails made entirely of repurposed bedsheets. He claims it happened after pirates stole their original sails. Historians still argue whether it was resourcefulness or sea myth. You imagine sleeping beneath a sail that once smelled like lavender soap and despair. Later, you haul the finished sail outside, where it's rigged to the main yard. It's an awkward dance line snapped tight, pulleys whine, and the sail flaps like a dragon just waking up. You duck more than once as a gust nearly wraps it around your head. Still, when it's fully raised, it billows out with a deep, thunderous hump. The Fluyt suddenly seems to inhale. The rigging comes alive too. You tie off halyards and sheets, adjust clew lines, and secure buntlines, all while half remembering which rope controls what. One of the apprentices, clearly a fan of flariels, let her fly, just as the yard swings and sends him stumbling into a bucket. That's the 3rd time this week. Here's your quirky tidbit. Dutch ships often coated their sails with a mixture of fish oil and ochre to make them more water-resistant. The resulting color? A dull, slightly sad orangey brown that made the sails look like giant dehydrated squash leaves. It also made the sails smell pungent. You lean too close to a freshly treated sail and nearly lose your lunch. After the main sails are up, you start working on the top sails, smaller secondary sails that sit above the main ones. These require climbing the mast again. It's time with the added challenge of balancing heavy cloth, sharp tools, and your dignity. From the crosstrees, you watch the sun glint off the canal and wonder if you're still technically on the clock. You help install brails on the mizzen latine sail ropes that let sailors gather the sail up like Venetian blinds. It's clever and quite fiddly, and you get rope burns on 3 fingers. The sail flutters for a moment, then catches wind, pulling gently at its lines like a restless hound on a leash. Here is a little open-ended gem for your evening thoughts. Historians still argue whether Fluyt sails were slightly smaller on purpose to make the ships less threatening in foreign ports. Some claim it was purely practical for maneuverability. Others say it was part of a broader Dutch strategy to appear harmless, while quietly dominating trade routes. Either way, you now suspect your entire sail is involved in international psychological warfare. You spend the afternoon greasing blocks, adjusting tack lines, and testing the trim of each sail. When a good breeze rolls in off the water, the whole rig sinks a deep creak here, a snap there. The groaning of wood and the gentle slap of linen folding and unfolding like an enormous, sleepy bird. The last sail to go up is the Sprite sail, a small triangle tucked beneath the bowsprit. It's often overlooked, but vital for steering and balance. As you lash it down, one of the riggers tells you it's nicknamed the nudge cloth. Why? Because it gives the ship a little nudge in tight turns, like a sailor whispering just a bit more to port. By sundown, the Fluyt sails are rigged and trimmed. They hang heavy now, waiting, not yet full of wind, but full of promise. The ship no longer feels still. Even moored in the dock, she rocks slightly like a creature ready to move. You run your fingers over a reef knot and feel the day's salt in your skin, the wind in your ears and the distant, sleepy murmur of canvas overhead. Tomorrow, maybe she'll move. But tonight, she dreams of the sea. The Fluyt waits at the dock, her masts proud, her sails quiet, and now it's time to turn inward. Not philosophically, you're not quite there yet, but physically. Today's work moves below decks, into the timbered belly of the ship, where dark corners hold the next vital steps, rigging out the interior, fitting the quarters, and finishing the places where sailors will eat, sleep, and try not to throw each other overboard during long voyages. You duck through the hatch, stooping automatically as your head clears the low beam abeam that has already claimed several skulls this week. The hold smells of pine, pitch, and old coffees. Somebody's been sneaking their tin mug below deck again. Lanterns swing from hooks overhead, casting flickering gold light across the ribs of the ship. It's like walking through a wooden whale. Your first task is helping install the bulkheads, those wooden walls that divide the ship's internal space into sections. The Fluyt's clever hull design means more cargo space, but it also requires smart internal planning. Most Fluyts had only one deck above the hold, which doubled as living space for the crew. Unlike military ships, which packed in cannons and complex quarters, Fluyts kept it simple. A stern cabin for the captain, open hammocks for the crew, and storage everywhere else. Mainstream historical fact incoming. One reason the Dutch Fluyt became such a dominant force in maritime trade was its maximized cargo capacity and minimized crew. A Fluyt often required as few as 12 to 15 sailors, which meant fewer mouths to feed and more profit per voyage. More goods, fewer people, and no pesky cannonballs taking up room, just commerce, all the way down. You help fit a series of narrow bunks along the port side, each just wide enough for a human and maybe one personal item usually, a pipe, a comb, or a bad decision. The captain's cabin, by contrast, gets actual walls, a writing desk, and a window. It's basically Versailles, if Versailles were made of pine and always smelled slightly of damp socks. As the day continues, you help saw, nail, and wedge shelves, benches, and cubbies into every possible corner. The ship's Scalia loose term for what is essentially a small box containing a firebox and an iron pot squeezed. Midship, you help install the hearthstones, trying not to think too hard about what happens if a pot tips over in rough seas. Quirky tidbit for you. The Dutch sometimes placed sand or bricks on the floor around the cooking area to soak up grease and offer a safer footing. Sailors also insisted it added flavor to the ship's stew. You deeply hope that was metaphorical. Nearby, the carpenter wrestles with the head, the primitive toilet situation that juts out over the bow. It's essentially a small wooden platform with holes in it, supported by rope and willpower. There's a privacy screen, which mostly provides moral support. You lean over, peek down into the swirling dock water, and resolve to never, ever have a curry at sea. While others hammer away at bunks and beams, you're sent below to help install barrel racks. The Fluyt will carry water, beer, dried peas, salted fish, hardtack, and the occasional luxury item cheese for the luckier ships. You wedge the racks carefully, making sure the barrels won't roll during high waves. And yes, you sample a dried pea. It's like chewing gravel that forgot how to be food. Above your head, someone is testing the pulley system for lifting cargo. Heavy boxes and barrels will descend through the main hatch via thick ropes and wooden tackle. It's operated by winches and sailor ingenuity. You give it a go and nearly haul yourself up instead. The sailors laugh, but kindly. Historians still argue whether the exact division of interior space aboard the Fluyt changed significantly from ship to ship, or whether the Dutch kept to a relatively standardized internal layout. Some records suggest strict measurements. Others show captains improvising based on trade needs, personal taste, or sheer whimsy. You suspect it's a bit of both. Some ships hauling tulip bulbs needed less space for hammocks after all. As the day wanes, you help coat interior surfaces with a mix of pitch and oil, waterproofing measure that also deters rot and insects. The fumes are pungent, and you briefly forget your own name. A sailor next to you claims that breathing in pitch makes dreams weirder, but more honest. You're not sure what that means, but tonight you'll find out. Later, you help mount the Fluyt's bell just outside the galley entrance. It's a squat bronze thing that will signal the passing of watches, mealtimes, and emergencies. You try ringing it once. The sound echoes through the ship, low and resonant, like a yawn made of metal. Finally, you help hang the hammocks. The crew insists on spacing them with an arm's width between each. You lie in one just to test and sway gently in the lantern light. The creaking of timbers, the distant slap of water against the hull, and the scent of tar and wood wrap around you like an old sea shanty. Now that the Fluyt isn't just a machine, it's a floating community, a home, and occasionally a barely controlled chaos box. But inside this wooden shell, sailors will joke, argue, mend sails, chew cloves, and eat stews thick enough to halt time. You climb back onto the deck, ducking the same low beam, and glance down into the hold. She's not empty anymore. She's ready to carry lives, food, memories, and everything from Baltic tar to Indonesian nutmeg. She's filling up inside and out. And tomorrow, she gets her skin. You return the next morning with a new task ahead, one that's less glamorous than sails and more painstaking than bunks. Today, you're sealing the Fluyt, giving her the protective skin she'll need to survive months, maybe years at sea. This means caulking the hull and waterproofing every seam, crevice, and vulnerable nook with a patience-testing mix of fiber, tar, and sheer stubbornness. As you approach, the ship rests quietly in her berth, like a beast halfway between sleep and searediness. Her wooden planks look smooth from a distance, but as you draw closer, you can see the narrow gaps between the board's natural joints that need to be filled so water stays out and buoyancy stays in. So yes, your job today is to keep the ocean out of the boat, no pressure. The work begins below the waterline, in the part of the hull that will soon live permanently wet. You lie on your back beneath her, staring up at the curved belly of the Fluyt, and feel like you're trying to brush the teeth of a sleeping whale. Your hands are already sticky with oakum, a fibrous substance made from tar-soaked hemp, which you'll now jam into every seam between the ship's planks. Here, see our mainstream historical fact. Oakum was the traditional material for caulking wooden ships across Europe, and Fluyts were no exception. The fibers expanded when wet, helping seal any leaks and keeping the hull watertight under pressure. Sailors often referred to this work as paying the seams, not in cash, but in sweat and smelly goo. You wield your caulking Arona blunt chiseland, a wooden mallet. With steady rhythm, you pound the oakum into the seams. One strike at a time. Tap, tap, whack. The iron thunks deep into the groove, and the oakum bunches up and clings like it doesn't want to go in. You win, eventually. You're covered in tar and regret by lunch. Every now and then, someone checks the seams by pouring small amounts of water over the hull to see if any leaks trickle through. A rigger jokes that you missed a spot. You joke that he should try your job. Nobody laughs because you're all very tired. Once the oakum is in place, you move on to the next layer of protection. Pitch. Thick, hot, and viscous, the pitch is heated in iron cauldrons on shore, stirred constantly to keep it from clumping or catching fire. A sticky, smoky cloud hovers over the area, and everyone starts sounding vaguely philosophical. As if breathing pitch triggers sudden life revelations. You dip your brush, more of a rag and a stick, honestly into the bubbling tar and paint it along the seams, sealing the oakum and giving the hull a dark, glossy sheen. The wood seems to drink it in like the ship is quietly grateful. Here's your quirky tidbit. In particularly tight quarters, apprentices were sometimes sent barefoot into narrow hall spaces with a lantern and a pot of warm pitch, using their hands to smear the mixture directly onto the wood. One unfortunate fellow supposedly fell asleep mid-job and woke up stuck to the hull like a human barnacle, He was fine, though he never trimmed his eyebrows again. You crawl into the bilge to finish the deepest interior crevices. It's cramped, dark, and smells like concentrated boat. The bilge is where water collects during voyages, a sloshy underworld of leaks, spills, and runoff. You don't linger. You also try not to touch anything too curiously shaped. Up on deck, another crew is sealing the seams between the planks of the deck itself. These need to be just as watertight, since any standing water could seep down into the hold. You take over one section near the mast, your hands moving automatically, now jam, pound, seal, brush. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like brushing a giant's hair with a grudge. And here is a scholarly debate to ponder as you swab tar into your boots. Historians still argue whether the blackening of the hull with pitch and pine tar was purely practical, or whether it also carried symbolic weight. Some suggest it was a visual marker of readiness, a ceremonial threshold between construction and purpose, like giving the ship her armor before battle. Others say it was simply cheaper than paint. Knowing sailors, it was probably both. Once the lower hull is fully tarred, the Fluyt looks darker, sleeker, more formidable. She no longer has that raw, pale timber look. She's dressed now, armored in a thick coat of waterproof resolve. You run your fingers along the hardened seams, feeling the ridges of oakum and pitch, and it's like reading Braille written in the language of oceans. Before sundown, you help with a special finishing step, rubbing the outer hull with a blend of pine resin and powdered chalk. It brightens the waterline area and deters marine growth like barnacles and algae. The Fluyt, once raw and vulnerable, now gleams with the dull confidence of a ship ready to face storms and salt spray. You sit on the dock afterward, watching the light glint off her sides. She reflects the sun in dark ripples, as if hiding secrets beneath her hull. And somewhere in your hair, there's a clump of oakum that you just can't quite reach. And now, my weary shipbuilder, she has her skin. Soon she'll need her voice, her compass, her charts, her purpose. But that's tomorrow. The Fluyt stands ready, gleaming in tar and chalk-dusted glory. She has her skeleton, her guts, and her waterproofed skin. Now, she needs her brain, or at least something approaching a navigational nervous system. Today you step aboard not to saw, or tar, or hammer, but to plot, chart, and orient this beast to the world beyond the harbor. This is the day the ship learns where she's going and how not to get permanently lost on the way. The captain, who has spent most of construction lurking nearby with a mug of beer and a face full of silent melsis full of silent judgment, appears early with a bundle under one arm. He tosses it onto a bench with the weight of someone who's either very confident or very tired. You untie it. Inside, a compass, a lead line, a quadrant, and a handful of mysterious objects that look like medieval dental instruments. This is the Fluyt's navigational toolkit. Each piece has its role in keeping the ship from becoming firewood off the coast of somewhere it shouldn't be. You're here to install, test, and understand these tools, so that when the sails rise, the crew will actually know which way they're going. It's like setting up the GPS on a wooden station wagon that's allergic to comfort. You start with the binnacle, a tall wooden housing that will sit just in front of the ship's wheel and hold the ship's main compass. It's more than a box. It's a carefully constructed structure with brass fittings, gimbal mounted to keep the compass level as the ship sways. You help mount it to the deck, tightening the bolts with a finality that makes you pause. This is the ship's heartbeat now. Without it, you're just guessing your way through a watery abyss. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 17th century, the magnetic compass had become a standard navigational tool for European seafarers, and the Dutch were especially precise in their compass calibrations. They even adjusted for variation, the difference between true north and magnetic north, which shifts depending on where you are in the world. This was cutting-edge science, even if it involved a lot of squinting and swearing. Next, you help hang the cross staff, a yard-long stick with sliding cross pieces, used to measure the altitude of the sun or stars above the horizon. With it, navigators could estimate latitude, a skill that balanced on the edge between science and sorcery. You try it, raising the staff and squinting at a low-hanging sun. You get a number. It might be your shoe size. Tucked below in the captain's cabin, you help secure his sea chart's hand-drawn maps of coastlines, shoals, wind patterns, and ocean currents. These are rolled into tubes and stored in leather cases, each labeled in ornate script. You gently unroll one. It's a rendering of the Baltic Sea, with dots for ports and dragons where someone got bored or creative. The inkwork is beautiful. Coastlines curve like sleeping animals. Quirky tidbit time. Many Dutch navigators carried personal logbooks filled not only with route data, but also with doodles, complaints about the cook, and drawings of exotic animals. One surviving logbook features a suspiciously modern-looking chicken wearing boots. Either it's satire, or chickens were more adventurous than we give them credit for. You return topside to mount the lead line bracket. The lead line, a rope, with a heavy lead weight on the end, will be dropped into the sea to measure depth. The rope is knotted at regular intervals, called marks. You help test it by lowering it from the rail while shouting the old calls. By the Mark 5. It's tactile, elegant, and extremely easy to mess up if you forget how many knots you've passed. Now for the sandglass, which the timekeeper will flip every 30 minutes to track shifts, speed, and daily routine. You'll hold it to the light grains falling in a thin, hypnotic ribbon. This glass, plus a chip log, lets the crew measure speed. Toss the board time, how long it takes for knots to play out, and boom, you've got your velocity, sort of assuming you don't drop the log. Historians still argue whether Dutch flight crews relied more on dead reckoning, estimating position based on speed, direction, and time, or celestial navigation using stars and sun angles. The truth likely lies in some blend of both, plus instinct, plus the occasional lucky gust of wind. Navigators were part scientist, part gambler, part poet. You help assemble the tools into the Fluyt S chart, room adjacent to the captain's pillow. It's not spacious, but it holds the essentials. A table, an oil lamp, a chest for charts, and a cupboard for instruments. There's even a tiny compass rose, etched into the wood like a secret blessing. You like that? It feels like the ship is finally finding her direction. Later, you paint the wind rose onto the main deck, a circle with radiating lines showing the cardinal points. It's symbolic more than functional, but every sailor will step across it before grabbing a line or steering the tiller. You dip your brush, trace north, then east, until the rose blooms beneath your hand. A compass tattoo for the ship herself. As evening falls, you help hoist the captain's back staff, another navigation tollent, to its box. It's curved like a protractor, having a dramatic phase, and measures solar altitude from behind the observer, reducing the risk of blinding oneself. Safety first, even in 1660. The final act, lighting the binnacle lamp. You strike flint to steel, coax a flickering flame to life, and place it carefully beside the compass. The brass glows gold in the lamplight. The needle steadies. And there it is. Your Fluyt now knows where she's going. Well, assuming the cook doesn't use the compass as a soup spoon again. It's a slow, golden morning when you arrive back on deck. A warm breeze teasing the rigging like a harp someone forgot to tune. The Fluyt's bones, skin, and mind are in place. Now comes the finishing touch that turns her from an anonymous hull into a named, almost mythic presence. Her adornments, her details, her face. Today, you're carving, painting, and mounting the ornamental elements, the parts no one strictly needs, but everyone remembers. Figureheads, nameboards, decorative rails.
Ow.
The ship's personality finally emerges, not in planks or pitch, but in scrollwork and pigment and flourishes shaped by calloused, stubborn hands. You start with the stern. The Dutch loved a good stern. Where English warships bristled with cannon and square-shouldered power, Dutch Fluyts often flaunted an elegantly curved transom wide, rounded and built like the back of a well-fed cat. Here, the ship's name will be carved in bold, flowing script, flanked by painted flowers or allegorical symbols. You help stencil it in first. Desirosta, Sea Rose. A woodcarver joins you, sleeves rolled, beard full of shavings. He begins chiseling the letters as you sand and prep the surrounding panels. Dutch ship names often drew from flora, saints, or abstract ideals, faith, prosperity, the golden fleece. You like Sea Rose? It suggests grace, but with thorns. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 17th century, decorative elements on Dutch merchant ships were regulated by guild standards. Ornamentation was encouraged, but modesty and cost efficiency ruled. Unlike ostentatious Spanish galleons or British flagships, the Fluyt favored a refined aesthetic, what we'd now call low-key fancy. Up near the prow, the figurehead waits. You've been warned not to stare too long. It might stare back. It's a woman's bust, carved from oak, her arms crossing modestly over her chest, eyes tilted toward the horizon. She has no name, but she's clearly the soul of the ship protective, watchful, serene. Some believe figureheads house the ship's spirit, guiding and guarding her at sea. You help hoist her into position, her curved form sliding into place beneath the bowsprit. Once bolted in, she seems to exhale. Quirky tidbit for today. Some shipbuilders swore that a figurehead had to be carved from a single block of wood, or else the spirit would leak out through the seams. Superstition or wisdom? Hard to say. But no one ever knowingly risked it. Some old docks still had signs warning no women, no women, no women, ginger, no women, split, figureheads. Make of that what you will. Back on deck, it's time to paint. You start at the stern, brushing red and green highlights into the carved scrollwork. The Dutch loved bold but limited palettes, vermilion, indigo, saffron, deep-sea green. It's part protection and part national pride. You apply gold leaf to a few of the scrolls and step back, squinting. Glints just right. Someone drops a pot of Prussian blue, and you all watch it spread like a growing bruise on the deck. The captain swears it's an omen. The rigger just slips and says nothing. You climb up to the stern gallery next to those elegant rails that hang above the rudder like a ship's balcony. A few Dutch Flyts were built with tiny windows here, sometimes with actual leaded glass panes, so the captain could gaze moodily out at the sea like a melancholic sea poet. You wipe one down, and you sits very easy to look philosophical through this window. You try it, you squint, you feel wise. Back near the wheel, you help etch the tiller with a decorative vine pattern. The helmsman's hand will rest here daily. It seems fitting that it should be beautiful. A master carver adds a tiny rose just beneath the handle your Fluyt's secret blossom, only visible to those who steer her. You pause for lunch, sitting beneath the shadow of the carved figurehead. Someone's boiled a pot of herring and onions. It smells like history's cruelest candle. You eat fast, because the best part is coming. The ship's naming ceremony. A small crowd gathers near the bow. Priest mutters a few lines. Captain looks uncomfortable in a clean shirt. A jug of cheap wine, technically sacramental, mostly just flammable, is passed around. A young apprentice climbs onto the prow and smashes a bottle of mead against the figurehead's pedestal. The crew cheers. The Sea Rose is now officially alive. Here's your scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these naming rituals held legal, weighed in 17th-century Dutch maritime law, or were purely cultural. Some suggest ships weren't even officially ships until named and launched. Others argue documentation mattered more than symbolism. Either way, the practice of christening a vessel was deeply emotionally half ceremony, half superstition, all tradition. As the paint dries and the carvings catch the lowering sun, you step back and take in the view. She doesn't look like a construction site anymore. She's a silhouette against the sky, sleek, curving, almost regal. You can almost hear her creak with anticipation, the gentle sway of her hull responding to water she hasn't yet touched. That evening, you help polish the nameplate one last time. Desirous, the Sea Rose. Not a warship, not a royal yacht, but a vessel of trade, of survival, of stories waiting to unfold across unfamiliar horizons. You run your fingers along the lettering, tracing every curl and serif. Next time you touch her, she'll be moving. The morning has a strange energy. It's not bustling. Exactly, more like everything is holding its breath. The Sea Rose is no longer a collection of parts. She's decorated, named, and alive in the eyes of her builders. But she hasn't yet moved. And that, for any creature born of wood and rope and seawater dreams, is the final test. Today, you launch her. It starts early. The tide has to be just right. The wind modest, the hull aligned. Ship launches in the 17th century were timed to natural rhythms, not scheduled like today's tight port timetables. So you arrive while the stars are still visible, and the dew still clings to the sawdust piles. And you wait, mug of something bitter and hot in hand for the harbor master's nod. The Fluyt rests atop her cradle. which itself sits atop a system of greased launchways, wooden tracks slathered in tallow, lard, and sometimes crushed eel guts. Yes, eel guts. You do not ask. It smells like betrayal and soup. Here is your mainstream historical fact. Dutch shipyards had refined slipway launches to an art form by the 1600s, using carefully engineered angles and greased sledges to reduce friction. It wasn't just brute force. It was timing, lubrication, and gravity. And once the supports were removed, the ship usually had no choice but to slide. Usually you and a dozen others position yourselves along the sides. Checking ropes and wedges, you watch a grizzled old-timer hammer in the final release pin. He looks like someone who's been crushed by a ship at least once and didn't T-mind much. A tense few seconds, a creak, then a groan so deep it feels like it comes from the ground itself. And then slowly, almost lazily, the sea rose begins to move. It's like watching a sleeping giant roll over. The hull eases down the slipway, wood on eel guts, gaining momentum. The rails scream a bit. Everyone holds their breath. You blink, and suddenly she's halfway to the water. And then, with a splash that soaks the first two rows of dignitaries and almost douses the priest, she's afloat. You cheer. Not politely, loudly. She bobs once, twice, finding her balance like a newborn deer, and then steadies nose pointed out toward the harbor mouth. She floats perfectly level. You can almost hear her exhale. The captain climbs aboard first, naturally. He plants a boot on the deck, gives a small nod, and mutters something like she'll do, which is captain speak, for I'm in love. The crew follows, climbing the rope ladders or being hauled aboard in cargo nets. You help toss up the final tool crates and the good rum. Now comes fitting the rigging in its final form. Up until now, the masts have been bare, the yards resting awkwardly or lashed to the deck. But here, in open water, with room to breathe, the Sea Rose can wear her full sail plan. You'll help haul up the main yard, securing it across the main mast. It creaks, sways, and finally settles into place with a sigh. Quirky tidbit. Fluyt rigging was intentionally simplified compared to warships designed for smaller crews, fewer sails, and easier handling. In fact, a properly rigged Fluyt could be operated by a skeleton crew of a dozen, which made it cheaper and more efficient. There's even a theory that some Flyts were designed to discourage too much manning, to reduce the temptation for mutiny. Fewer sailors, fewer opinions. You test the lines, hoist the jibs, and even help climb the rigging to furl the foresail, fingers aching, legs wobbling slightly in the breeze. From up here, the world tilts but the ship doesn't. She sits steady, calm, eager. You feel proud and slightly nauseous. Back on deck, the helmsman tests the rudder. The tiller swings easily, the long arm of wood gliding side to side as the crew calls out bearings. The water parts around her gently, as if acknowledging her presence. Then something weird happens. A goat appears. You're not sure where it came from, possibly the carpenter's pet. It's possibly a stowaway, but there it is, standing near the capstan, chewing rope like it owns the place. No one removes it, just stays. Ships have mascots, and apparently the Sea Rose has selected hers. She's named Bartholomew within the hour. She responds to nothing and fears no one. Historians still argue whether such animals served a real purpose: waste control, morale, emergency food, or whether they were just tolerated freeloaders. One theory holds that some captains believed animals absorbed bad luck. Bartholomew, it seems, is here to soak up the curses in the rigging. That evening, anchored in the harbor with lanterns swaying from the rigging, and the stars beginning to emerge like shy fireflies, you sit beside the stern rail and look back at the shipyard. It's quieter now. The slipway is empty. The cradle lies in ruins. The shouts and laughter of the day are fading, replaced by soft creaking and water slapping the hull. It's hard to believe that this floating living thing was once a heap of planks, iron nails, and prayers. The Sea Rose is ready. Not perfect, not invincible, but ready. Tomorrow, she sails. You don't sleep much that night. Not because it's loud or uncomfortable, though. It is both, but because the Sea Rose feels different now. There's a gentle sway under your cot, a rhythmic slap of water against hull that keeps whispering, "Go, go, go." And finally, as dawn nudges the harbor with a sleepy golden elbow, you rise. This is it, the maiden voyage. And you're now officially crew. which means you'll be doing a little of everything and a lot of sweating. The harbor stirs to life as the sun rises. Gulls circle overhead in lazy loops, and the neighboring ships rattle with clumsy activity. The Sea Rose sits proud and painted among them, still wearing her launch ribbons like a slightly vain debutante. Her hull reflects the morning light in waves of amber and umber, the carved lettering at the stern shimmering with briny pride. You step aboard and inhale pine tar, rope, dried salt, and goat. Bartholomew has already claimed a crate and is chewing a boot. Preparations begin immediately. You're in charge of final store's inventory, which means crawling into the hold to count barrels. So many barrels. Here, your mainstream historical fact. A fully stocked Dutch Fluyt could carry up to 400 tons of cargo, depending on size and configuration. But for the maiden voyage, most of the weight is provisions, salted meat, hardtack, beans, onions, beer, gunpowder, rope. Spare, sailcloth, tar, candles, extra planking and, yes, plenty of water. You count them all, your pencil stubs scratching into the manifest like a sleep-deprived squirrel. Everything has a place. Large barrels are wedged against bulkheads with wooden chocks. Smaller crates fill the gaps. The storage method is more Tetris than tidy. You squeeze between casks and call out numbers, your voice echoing in the dim belly of the ship, and then rots. Of course, they skitter along the edge of your vision, tiny, smug freeloaders. You toss a boot and miss. Everyone misses. Always. Rat catching becomes an ongoing game with no winners. Here's your quirky tidbit. Dutch sailors believed rats predicted storms.
Ow.
If the rat suddenly disappeared or ran toward the deck en masse, it meant trouble. So oddly enough, rats were both hated and watched with superstitious reverence. On some ships, they even named the boldest ones. Above deck, final loading begins. Cranes swing casks aboard using block and tackle pulleys. Dock workers shout. A small child tries to sneak onto the ship, chased by an equally small dog. It's chaos. Glorious, groaning chaos. Then comes ballast. Historians still argue whether Fluyts use stone, iron, scrap, or sand most often. But your Sea Rose gets a mix of river stones and pig iron. It's loaded low in the hull, evenly distributed to balance the ship's center of gravity. Without it, the Sea Rose might heel dangerously in a crosswind. With it, she sliced through the waves like a buttered eel. You pause to help tie down the last of the deck cargo. Crates of fine Delft pottery headed for Sweden, and a few suspiciously unlabeled barrels. You ask about them and are told, don't. So, you don't. The captain gives the signal, and the dockhands release the mooring lines. The Sea Rose groans against the pier, then sighs free. The tide is with you, and slowly, gently you begin to drift. Sails rise. The Fluyt's three-masted rig catches the breeze with practiced grace. The crew hauls and braces, pulling the lines taut and adjusting the angle of the yards. You're handed a line and told to sweat it. You try. Your hands burn. Your pride survives. Here is where you see the genius of the Fluyt's design. Unlike larger warships or galleons, her narrow upper deck and broad belly reduce wind resistance while maximizing cargo space. She turns easily, her tall sails catching even light winds with surprising power. Within minutes, you're out of the harbor and into the open water. The city shrinks behind you, its red-tiled roofs and stepped gables, giving way to low dunes and windmills along the shore. You can still see the shipyard, the empty slipway where the Sea Rose was born. It looks impossibly small now. You sail past other vessels. Squat fishing boats returning with the dawn catch. A massive VOC warship bristling with guns and arrogance. A sleek French brigantine with smugly clean sails. Everyone watches everyone. You wave. Some wave back. Some just squint. Mid-morning brings your first emergency. A sail jammed in the topmast block. A sailor climbs up with wild agility, swinging between rattlins like a rope spider, and frees it. You look up in horror. That'll be you next week, someone says. You pretend not to hear. Then comes the test of the rudder. You're asked to take the tiller while the helmsman scratches something indecipherable into his journal. It's heavier than you expect, slow to move at first, then terrifyingly responsive once the ship starts to heel with the wind. You overcorrect, The sea rose lurches slightly. Bartholomew bleats disapprovingly. You learn fast. The crew laughs. It's not cruelly, just the way people do when they VA all done the same thing and know you'll do it again. You adjust, find the rhythm. Before long, you re-steering a 17th century vessel like someone who could at least bluff their way through it. Lunch is boiled beans and smoked eel. You eat it without chewing too much. The wind smells cleaner out here, saltier, sharper. There's a rhythm now to the sea rose's motion, a long, steady roll that pulls at your bones until you feel less like walking and more like swaying.
Ouch.
And then you see your first porpoise.
Ouch.
It arcs out of the water just ahead of the bow, sleek and fast, followed by two more. They race alongside the ship, riding the bow wave. It's absurdly perfect. You lean over the rail, mouth open, and laugh like an idiot. Everyone does, even the grumpy cooper. You swear Bartholomew bleats in applause. The day ends with the sun low on the water, turning the sea to molten gold. The sails glow. The deck creaks. You lie back against a warm coil of rope, heart full of salt and wind. The sea rose is underway. You're part of her now. And tomorrow, the open sea awaits. You wake to a different world. Gone is the coast. The last outline of church spires and windmills has slipped beneath the horizon sometime in the night. The sea rose is now fully at sea, alone with the wind, the water, and a crew that smells increasingly like boiled socks. Welcome to the part where the romance of sailing meets the very soggy reality. Your hammock sways with each roll of the ship. You've grown. Not entirely sure which direction is up. Someone shouts, "Watch change," and a boot lands a little too close to your head. You crawl out, rub your eyes, and haul yourself above deck. The wind is strong today, not violent but insistent. The sails are trimmed to a taut V, and the Fluyt surges forward with surprising grace for a ship shaped like a floating barrel. Waves slap the hull with steady rhythm, and the air is cool and wet, tinged with seaweed and salt. Today is seamanship training. You are, apparently, a sailor now, sort of. Let us start with your mainstream historical fact. Dutch Fluyts revolutionized maritime trade not only because of their cargo space, but because they could operate with minimal crew, often just 12 to 20 men for a full voyage. Every rope, sail, and line was positioned for efficiency. The rigging was streamlined, the masts unornamented, and the deck cleared of excess frills. This was a ship built for work, not showing off. Which means that now, as the wind stiffens and the sea rose rolls slightly more than you'd like, you're learning the names and purposes of approximately 1 billion ropes. Every rope has a job and a name. The sheets control the angle of the sails. The halyards raise them. The braces swing the yards. The buntlines gather the bottom of the sails when they're furled. And the rope you just grabbed, that's not your rope. It's somebody else's responsibility. Let go. You sweat through the lesson, tangled in sailcloth and swear words. The bosun shouts instructions like poetry. Ease the fore topsail sheet. Haul the starboard brace. And if you tangle that line again, I will throw you overboard with a kiss goodbye. You mutter apologies and keep working. Slowly, the tangle in your fingers becomes something like understanding. You find the rhythm, the push-pull of rope and canvas, the strange but elegant logic of how wind turns into movement. Your muscles ache, your palms blister, but something about it feels good. Also, your clothes are wet. Constantly. There's no point in fighting it. It's to accept that everything you own will smell like salt and goat for the rest of time. Now for a fun little quirky tidbit. Sailors in the 17th century believed in whistling up a wind. If you wanted a breeze, you'd whistle for it, but never below deck, and never during a storm. That, they believed, would anger the sea gods. You're pretty sure someone aboard the Sea Rose is secretly whistling today because the wind keeps building. Not dangerous, just energetic. Later in the day, you're introduced to the navigational instruments. Small table is cleared near the stern cabin, and the navigator, an older man with one eye and zero patience, starts explaining how to tell where you are when the entire world looks like soup. He uses a cross-staff, a compass, and the ship's log. You're also shown a backstaff, a Dutch improvement that lets you measure the sun's angle without looking directly at it, thus preserving your precious eyeballs. Helpful. He shows you how to use the stars, the sun, and dead reckoning. which sounds like a pirate threat, but just means estimating your position based on previous speed and direction. Navigation, you realize, is part science, part guesswork, and part pure stubborn optimism. Here's where the scholarly debate comes in. Historians still argue whether 17th century sailors had any real grasp on longitude at sea. Latitude was easier, they could track the sun or stars. But longitude, that required precise timekeeping, and marine chronometers wouldn't be perfected for another century. So, for now, the Sea Rose is guided by instinct, stars, sandglasses, and maybe a few whispered prayers. You try your hand at the cross staff, you hold it to your cheekbone, squint at the sun, and promptly stab yourself in the ear. The navigator sighs and takes it away before you can injure someone else. By mid-afternoon, the sea starts to roll harder. It's not stormy, but enough to send plates skittering and rope coils slithering like snakes across the deck. You practice reffing the sails, reducing their surface area to avoid overpowering the ship. It's harder than it looks. You get caught in a line and nearly become part of the rigging. Again, below deck, the hold creaks ominously. Barrels shift. Somewhere, Bartholomew lets out a suspiciously smug bleat. You're told to inspect the lashings. You crawl into the gloom, lantern in hand, and find that some of the iron ballast has shifted. You wedge it back with a pry bar, swearing softly and hoping that nothing else slides. Dinner's a stew of indeterminate origin, served in wooden bowls and shared with 2 weevils and a spoon.
Ow. You eat it anyway?
No one talks much during meals, just the sound of slurping, chewing, and the occasional belch from the bosun. As the sky darkens, the crew sets the night watches. You're assigned second watch middle of the night, when it's coldest, darkest, and loneliest. You try to nap beforehand. Swinging gently in your hammock and listening to the Sea Rose creak around you like an old woman whispering to herself. When your turn comes, you clamber onto deck, under a sky so full of stars, it looks like it might burst. The sea is ink black and endless, the sails pale ghosts above. You take your post at the rail, squinting at the horizon, and wondering what's out there, pirates maybe, or whales, or worse. Calm. The wind sings through the rigging. The Sea Rose hums beneath your boots. And slowly, night carries you onward. The days blur. At first, you try to count them, marking scratches into a beam with your eating knife, like a prisoner in a very breezy, very splintery jail, but eventually you give up. Life aboard the Sea Rose settles into a rhythm, a gently rocking routine of labor, salt, and the occasional flying fish that smacks someone in the face. You're no longer a wide-eyed deckhand fumbling with ropes. You're still clumsy, sure, but now you know what not to touch. You've learned to duck when the boom swings. You can tell the difference between the fore topsail halyard and the main brace without looking like you're solving a math problem. That's growth. It's been nearly 2 weeks at sea. This morning starts with a mystery. A barrel is leaking. Not just any barrel, one marked with a curious, barely legible symbol that may or may not resemble a smug octopus. It's been stowed near the other don't ask barrels, and now it's dribbling sticky liquid all over the deck. The first mate sniffs it, shrugs, and says, rum, maybe, or turpentine. Either way, patch it. You draw the short straw and fetch pitch from the bosun's chest.
Oh.
While the rest of the crew hauls the sails for a wind shift. You're elbow deep in goo, muttering like a curse-happy raccoon. Mainstream historical fact break. Dutch flight voyages often lasted anywhere from a few weeks to several months, depending on the route. Coastal trips to Scandinavia were relatively short, while voyages to Asia with the Dutch East India Company could last over a year. Life aboard became a test of endurance and smell. With your barrel emergency temporarily under control, you join the sail crew to adjust for changing winds. The Sea Rose rides smooth but steady swells. The wind is less fierce today, but still constant, brushing your cheeks with that cool, briny hand you've come to know intimately. You pull, sweat, and shout across the yardarms until the sails are trimmed tight and humming again. Then, free time. Yes, it exists. Maybe half an hour here or there if the wind is steady and the sea kind. You sit with a group near the windward rail where the sun hits just right. Someone passes around a tiny tin whistle, and one of the older sailors plays a slow, sad tune. It's about a girl named Elzge and a very stupid goose. Or maybe it's about a sinking barge, it's hard to tell. The words shift with each verse. Quirky tidbit of the day. Dutch sailors often carved scrimshaw into bone or wood during these quiet moments. You're handed a lump of driftwood and a blunt knife. You begin carving what's meant to be the sea rose. It ends up looking more like a potato with a hat. Still, everyone nods approvingly. Later, you're given a chance to climb the main mast. You pause. It's not the height that scares you, it's the wobbly rigging and the ever-moving deck that mess with your balance. But you go anyway. Hand over hand, foot over rope, you haul yourself upward. The ship shrinks beneath you. The ocean expands. The wind sharpens, and suddenly you're at the crosstrees, clinging to a mast that feels skinnier than a toothpick. From here, the world is breathtaking. You see the curve of the horizon. The sails swell below you like the lungs of some breathing beast. The Fluyt is utterly alone on the ocean, a wooden fleck in a sea of blue. You grin. You may also cry a little, it's fine. No one sees. Historians still argue whether Fluyts had a true advantage over larger ships in blue water navigation or if they were simply cheap and efficient, enough to outweigh their fragility in storms. Some say their shallow draft and high maneuverability made them better in coastal routes, while others believe Fluyts regularly punched above their weight in long-distance voyages. You're leaning toward miracle of maritime economy. Climbing back down, you nearly fall. Twice, but your pride survives intact. Bartholomew, lounging near the galley hatch, greets you with a disinterested bleat. Then come the clouds. Not storm clouds yet, but enough to trouble the navigator. The stars vanish behind thick gray. The sun becomes a faint blur. Navigation by celestial bodies, not happening. Dead reckoning takes over, and you hear more than one sailor mutter prayers to St. Elmo or mumble at their lucky dice. To make things more fun, a chill settles in the air. Rain begins, not a downpour. Just a cold, steady mist that soaks everything and refuses to stop. You tie your cloak tighter. Everything creaks more in damp weather. Sea Rose groans like she's telling old jokes no one asked for. Dinner is rice boiled in beer. It's ... fine. There's a weevil doing backflips in your bowl. You eat around him. Later that night, you're tasked with helping to pump the bilge. The Fluyt is watertight mostly, but water always finds a way. You and 3 others man the manual pump-in old wooden contraption with a squealing handle that leaks more noise than water. You pump, and then keep pumping. You're soaked, cold, and somehow grinning. Why? Because you realize you're doing it. Really doing it. You're not just watching a ship at sea, you're part of it. The rigging has your fingerprints. The barrels bear your lashing. The sails billow from your labor. And the bilge water well, that's your problem too now? As the rain continues, a sudden shout erupts from the lookout. Sail. Ho. Everyone scrambles to deck. Through the gloom, you spot it far on the horizon, a dark smudge against gray sky. Another ship. Tension crackles across the Sea Rose. You grab a spyglass and squint. The distant vessel has square sails and a sleek hull. It could be friendly. It could be competition. It could be pirates. You prepare the Sea Rose for contact. The cannon Z's she has a few are uncovered. Powder is readied, and a shout goes below for the carpenter to double-check hull seams. But the ship turns away. It's faster. Probably a brigantine. And just like that, it's gone, swallowed by the mist, like a ghost returning to whatever haunted trade route spat it out. Back to work. As the sun sets, the rain finally breaks. A pale pink glow paints the western horizon, and for a moment everything feels calm again. You find your hammock, soaked but content. Your muscles ache. Your eyes flutter. The Sea Rose creaks around you. Somewhere nearby, someone hums the song about Elge and the goose again. The waves, ever steady, rock you to sleep. The voyage nears its end. You wouldn't know it by the look of things there, as still nothing but sea in every direction. The sails still strain with the wind, and the deck still creaks like an old man complaining about his knees, but the crew has changed. There's an energy now just beneath the surface. Tighter movements, shorter jokes. Eyes glancing ahead more often than behind. You're almost there. Your body has adjusted to shipboard life. Your hands are tougher, calloused from rope work and salt. Your knees are permanently bruised. You walk with that odd rolling gait now, even on flat surfaces. The Sea Rose feels like an extension of yourself. And she's holding up. Your Fluyt humble, boxy, unglamorous is nearing the completion of her first major voyage. The hull still holds firm. The rigging sings in the wind. The crew has settled into a smooth, practiced rhythm, less a collection of individuals now, and more like one strange, muttering organism that smells faintly of onions and damp wool. Today begins with repairs. Yes, again. A small tear in the main topsail needs patching. You join the sailmaker up on the yard, dangling 40 feet above the deck like some confused pigeon with a needle. Together, you stitch heavy sailcloth, using waxed linen thread and steady fingers. Every pass of the needle pulls the sail back to strength. You don't even stab yourself this time. Progress. Mainstream historical fact incoming. Sail maintenance was constant on 17th-century ships. Canvas wore down fastest, especially in wind-heavy routes. Dutch Fluyts carried spare sails and sailcloth, and sailmakers were among the most respected hands aboard. Your stitching isn't perfect, but the old sailmaker grunts a low, almost approving noise. That's high praise, honestly. Down on deck, the coopers are busy checking barrel integrity again. You'll help them roll the remaining casks, some of which feel suspiciously lighter than they should. Water, wine, evaporation, or just long voyage math. Historians still argue whether Dutch captains ever underreported profitable goods to pocket the difference on the books. You glance around at the crew's suddenly innocent faces and wonder. At noon, the sun finally breaks through. Blue sky for the first time in days. The sea glitters. You strip off your cloak and lean over the rail, basking like a lizard. The wind shifts slightly warm, almost tropical. Sailor points a dark line on the horizon. Land. No one shouts. No one jumps. But you feel it ripple through the deck, through the bones of the sea rose. Land, the voyage is nearly over. Still, you have work to do. The deck must be cleaned, gear stowed, ropes coiled just so. The ship is to arrive looking respectable and, more importantly, if the port inspectors are to be impressed, the sea rose must look sharp. You're handed a swab. Yes, the deck gets mopped. Seawater, elbow grease, and sand. You scrub in big, lazy circles alongside 3 other sailors, humming that Elsa John de Goose song under your breath, quirky tidbit to accompany your mopping. Dutch sailors sometimes swabbed decks barefoot, using their toes to grip the rope on the swab. You try it? You immediately stub your toe. You go back to boots. The captain calls the crew together for a final rundown. You're approaching Batavia Moderna Jakarta, the Dutch East India Company's jewel in the east. This is no quiet fishing village. It's a massive fortified trading hub, pulsing with merchants, soldiers, spice traders, and the occasional unsupervised goat. The Sea Rose's cargo will be offloaded. Barrels of salted fish, cloth bolts, cheese, timber, perhaps a few secret crates labeled ceramic shards that are definitely not ceramic shards. You'll have shore leave, though how much depends on how quickly unloading and resupply go. The coastline draws closer. You can see the shape of land now low, forested, hazy, with heat. Canoes dot the bay, and further in, the clustered roofs of the port rise like a row of dragon scales. Sails tighten. She's entering the harbor, her hull groaning with pride. You dress in your cleanest shirt, still vaguely beige and still smells like anchovies, but it's the thought that counts. Docking is a blur of shouted orders, lowered sails, and lines thrown ashore. The Sea Rose bumps gently against the dock. Mooring lines are secured. The crew exhales, as one. You've done it. The Fluyt, born from Dutch oak and stubborn ambition, has carried her cargo across a restless sea. She's not sleek. She's not fast. But she's dependable. Her design-rounded belly, narrow deck, maximized volume was made to move goods, not impress lords. And she did her job. So did you. Historians still argue whether the Fluyt's dominance came from brilliant engineering or sheer economic muscle. But when you pat the rail one last time and feel the solid creak of planks below your hand, you know, it was both. You step ashore. The smells hit first: spices, fresh fruit, charcoal fires, river mud. The noise, shouting in languages you don't recognize, the thud of carts, the calls of traders. Color everywhere: red cloth, green bananas, golden trinkets, and above it all the sharp sun, cutting through like a brand new page. You wander. You find a vendor selling fried plantains. You buy one. You eat it slowly, tasting the oil, the sugar, the dirt on your fingers. And when you glance back, the Sea Rose rests at the dock, sails furled, her flag drooping in the warm air. Tired, proud, waiting. Not the fastest ship, not the prettiest, but she got you here. And as your eyes grow heavy, your feet aching from unfamiliar land, your thoughts drift gently back to the creak of timber, the whisper of canvas, and the wide blue silence of the open sea. The wind down begins. Now there's no more shouting. There's no pounding of boots on deck, just the gentle lap of water against the hull. The Sea Rose is quiet, her cargo offloaded, her sails drying in the sun. You imagine her rocking gently in the harbor, her ropes softly swaying like seaweed beneath the tide. You find a quiet place near the water, somewhere warm, shaded. Stone beneath you is still radiating the afternoon heat. You lean back. The noise of the port fades away into a soft hum. Your body is still gently moving, even though you're on land. That's the last gift of the sea. Your muscles remember the rhythm, the way the Fluyt cradled you through storms and silence alike. It's in your bones now. You close your eyes. There's no rush, no sails to furl, no barrels to lash, just memory and rest. The smell of oak and tar lingers in your nose. Somewhere far off, a goat bleats. Of course it does. Your breathing slows. The Sea Rose sleeps. And so do you.